Welcome back to Crypto Equation, and today we are stepping into one of the most misunderstood and often misinterpreted topics in the digital asset world, the supply mechanics of XRP, and why so many people feel there is something they are not being told, when in reality the truth is far more structured, far more strategic, and far more important than most holders realize, because the real story behind XRP supply is not hidden, it is simply overlooked, overshadowed by price action narratives and short-term emotions, while the deeper forces shaping the future of digital value quietly unfold behind the scenes. When people hear the phrase supply warning, their minds immediately race to fear, uncertainty, and doubt. But the real warning has nothing to do with danger and everything to do with misunderstanding the system you are participating in. Misunderstanding the design, misunderstanding the purpose, misunderstanding the architecture of how value is distributed, moved, and maintained inside a global settlement asset designed for institutional scale. The truth is that most holders never take time to understand how supply actually works, and this lack of understanding creates gaps, emotional gaps, psychological gaps, speculative gaps that often turn into confusion. But the moment you understand the architecture, the whole picture shifts. XRP's supply model is not similar to typical digital assets. It is not designed for scarcity-driven speculation. It is designed for liquidity-driven functionality. This means its supply structure follows a logic aligned with settlement economics, not with market hype. And this is where the real misunderstanding begins, because the world of speculation looks at supply one way, but the world of global finance looks at supply very differently. To understand this, we must first explore the real purpose behind having a large supply in a settlement asset, because this is the point almost no one discusses, and yet it is the most important truth in the entire conversation. A settlement asset is not designed to be hoarded. It is designed to move. A settlement asset must remain accessible, liquid, transferable, and scalable across global markets. Institutions do not chase low-supply assets. Institutions chase assets that can support trillions of dollars in daily movement. They require depth. They require liquidity. They require supply that can meet the demands of global finance without creating bottlenecks. This is the part holders often never hear, and this is the first real warning, the warning about misunderstanding the purpose of supply. XRP is not designed as a store of scarcity. It is designed as a tool of movement. The supply is built to support that movement. This is why XRP's supply structure looks unconventional to retail investors. It is not built for them. It is built for institutions. But let us go even deeper, because the second misunderstanding is even more important: the difference between circulating supply, available supply, locked supply, and functional supply. Most people lump everything together and assume every token is interchangeable, but in reality, each category has a different meaning in the global liquidity model. XRP's escrow system is one of the most misunderstood elements in digital finance. Many people look at the escrow and assume it is an artificial force or an unknown risk, when in reality, escrow is simply a controlled release mechanism. It is structured to provide predictability to institutions which prefer stable supply logic over chaotic emission models. Escrow is not a risk. Escrow is stability, and stability is the language of global finance. The reason people feel confused or uncertain about XRP's supply is because they interpret escrow through a speculative mindset instead of through a settlement mindset. Locked supply is not accessible supply. It is structured supply, programmed supply, anchored supply, and the global financial system prefers assets that follow predictable patterns, not chaotic distribution curves. Now let us explore another layer of misunderstanding the myth that supply determines future success. In speculative markets, supply dictates scarcity, and scarcity drives emotional narratives. But in utility-driven systems, value is shaped by usage, not by the number of units in existence. The entire internet economy runs on abundance, not scarcity. The more nodes, the more value. The more access, the more adoption. The more compatibility, the more success. XRP's supply model follows the logic of infrastructure, not the logic of collectibles. This is why the supply feels unusual to the untrained eye. It is infrastructure scale, not investor scale. The real warning here is not about supply itself, but about misinterpreting supply under the wrong lens. Now let us step into something even deeper, something rarely discussed: the psychological impact of misunderstanding supply. When holders do not understand how supply works, they panic during quiet periods and become euphoric during volatile periods without grounding their perspective in the actual architecture of the asset. But the institution institutions that evaluate XRP do not judge it based on circulating quantity. They judge it based on throughput capability, settlement efficiency, and liquidity distribution. The institutions that will shape the next era of digital finance do not ask how many units exist. They ask how many units are needed to support global settlement. And this is where XRP's supply becomes logical. Now, let us explore a concept almost no one talks about: the requirement of distributed liquidity. In order for an asset to function globally, it must be widely distributed. If too few people hold too many units, the system becomes unstable and unusable for institutions. Liquidity becomes congested, movement becomes inefficient, markets become fragile. This is why XRP distribution is broad and structured. It is why liquidity spreads across exchanges, across regions, across institutions, across markets. The supply is not designed to be concentrated, it is designed to be accessible. The real warning here is that many holders interpret decentralization only in terms of governance, but ignore decentralization of liquidity. Decentralized liquidity is equally important. If liquidity becomes bottlenecked, the system fails its intended purpose. Now let us explore one of the biggest misunderstandings of all: the belief that supply determines relevance. Relevance is not created by numbers. It is created by necessity. A technology becomes relevant when it solves a real-world problem better than anything else. And XRP solves a problem the world is rapidly moving towards: solving the problem of global settlement fragmentation. Value in the digital economy must move instantly across borders. Regulations must synchronize across jurisdictions. Digital currencies must interoperate across networks. Tokenized assets must settle without friction. Institutions must operate on rails that do not break under modern demand. XRP is built inside that future, and its supply is built to support that future. Now let us explore something even more important: the emotional environment around supply. People fear what they do not understand, and when they do not understand supply mechanics, they assume the worst. But supply is not the threat. Misunderstanding supply is the threat, because when you misunderstand something, you misjudge its purpose. And when you misjudge its purpose, you misinterpret its future. The holders who study the system see clarity, while the holders who chase narratives see confusion. Now let us explore another structural truth: the difference between locked supply and circulating supply over time. XRP's supply schedule is gradual, intentional, measurable, and predictable. Predictability is something global systems crave because unpredictability breaks trust. Predictable supply models create stability, and stability creates long-term viability. This predictable structure is one of the most important strengths of XRP's supply model, yet it is rarely discussed because most people only focus on price action instead of architecture. Now let us dive deeper into settlement economics, because this is where everything becomes clear. In traditional markets, settlement requires pre-funded accounts, liquidity pools, and nostro-vostro networks that trap trillions of dollars worldwide. This trapped liquidity represents inefficiency at a scale most people cannot imagine. XRP's model is designed to replace this inefficiency. It replaces pre-funded accounts. It unlocks liquidity globally. It allows value to move across borders instantly. And to support this type of movement, the system needs a supply large enough to service global liquidity requirements. This is the warning most holders never hear. The warning that the supply is not a weakness, it is the system. And this system requires enough units to function across the world without creating liquidity shortages. Now let us explore the final concept of this first half: the idea of narrative gaps. Narrative gaps occur when holders only understand part of a system and fill the rest with speculation. But speculation cannot replace architecture, and architecture cannot be understood through emotional narratives. The real story behind XRP supply is not what they are not telling you. It is what people never take time to understand. Because when you understand the intention behind the design, the entire system reveals itself. The second half of this script will go even deeper into the psychology of liquidity distribution, institutional needs, global settlement requirements, and why the supply model of XRP is not a warning of danger, but a warning against misunderstanding the digital future unfolding around us. Because the second half of this warning reveals something even more important than the mechanics of supply. It reveals the psychology institutions use to evaluate assets, the infrastructure requirements of global settlement systems, and the deeper truth about why misunderstanding XRP supply has created more confusion than clarity among holders. The real warning was never about the supply itself. The real warning was about misunderstanding how supply works in a system designed for global scale rather than short-term speculation. When we look deeper, we see that the architecture of XRP supply follows a logic built for a world that moves trillions of dollars across borders every day, a world where settlement speed is measured in fractions of a second, a world where outdated rails can no longer support the pressure of modern commerce. The first deeper truth of this part is that institutions evaluate supply differently from retail investors. Retail investors tend to see scarcity as value. Institutions see utility as value. Retail focuses on how little exists. Institutions focus on how much can move. Retail wants limited quantity. Institutions want scalable liquidity. These two perspectives rarely align, and this is the core reason why XRP's supply model is often misunderstood. The supply was never meant to serve scarcity-driven markets. It was meant to serve liquidity-driven systems. This is why institutions do not fear XRP's supply. They need it. They need liquidity pools that can support massive payment flows without creating instability. They need deep markets, not shallow ones. They need predictable release schedules, not chaotic distribution. They need assets that can support real-world usage, not speculative cycles. This leads us to the second truth, the role of escrow in long-term stability. Many people see escrow and assume restriction. Institutions see escrow and see predictability. Escrow provides clarity. It provides structure. It provides confidence that supply cannot flood markets uncontrollably. It ensures long-term distribution remains steady and measurable. This is exactly what global institutions need when evaluating assets that could support cross-border value movement. The third truth is the requirement of global liquidity distribution. No settlement system can function if liquidity is concentrated in a few hands. Concentration creates bottlenecks. Bottlenecks create instability. Instability breaks settlement. Settlement breaks global commerce. XRP's supply and distribution model avoids this problem by ensuring liquidity spreads across markets, exchanges, and participants. The real warning here is not about the amount of supply. It is about understanding why that supply must exist for the system to function. The fourth truth is the transition from old financial rails to new digital ones. The traditional system relies on pre-funded accounts around the world, a model that traps immense capital in stationary pools. This model no longer works in the digital economy. It is too slow, too expensive, and too fragmented. Digital settlement demands mobility, not pre-funding. It demands instant global movement, not locked liquidity. XRP's supply exists to support this mobility. This is why understanding the supply matters, because the supply is not arbitrary, it is functional. The fifth truth is that supply does not determine relevance. Relevance is shaped by necessity. Relevance is shaped by function. Relevance is shaped by adoption. And XRP's relevance comes from its design as a bridge asset, capable of operating within the architecture the world is quietly moving toward. The supply supports that design. The sixth truth is the importance of liquidity resilience. Liquidity must remain stable during volatility, during high demand, during international settlement spikes, during institutional activity surges. If supply were too limited, settlement would break. Liquidity would dry up. Markets would crash under pressure. A global rail needs deep supply to remain resilient. This is why institutions view XRP's supply positively. The seventh truth is the rise of tokenization. As the world tokenizes assets and financial instruments, the demand for settlement rails increases dramatically. Tokenized markets require settlement assets with the capacity to facilitate constant movement. This is where XRP's supply model becomes essential. It ensures the asset can support future tokenized systems without running into liquidity shortages. The eighth truth is psychological. People fear supply because they assume supply equals dilution. But dilution only occurs when supply is created unpredictably or excessively. XRP's supply is fixed, it is structured, it is predictable. No new units appear out of nowhere. The system is closed and controlled. The real threat was never dilution. The real threat was misunderstanding. Now let us explore one of the least discussed concepts, liquidity corridors. Global value movement depends on corridors linking countries, institutions, and currencies. These corridors require consistent and reliable liquidity flows. If the asset powering the corridor lacks supply, the corridor fails. XRP's supply ensures corridors remain functional. The ninth truth is that supply only matters when utility does not exist. In assets with no real usage, supply becomes central to narrative. In assets built for utility, supply becomes a tool for infrastructure. XRP falls into the second category. This is why institutional research rarely mentions XRP supply as a risk. The 10th truth is the transformation unfolding beneath the surface of global finance. Governments are modernizing, banks are upgrading, payment networks are synchronizing, digital currencies are emerging, tokenized systems are expanding, and all these systems require interoperable settlement. They require assets capable of moving value globally without friction. They require liquidity deep enough to support massive flows. This is why XRP's supply model aligns with global modernization. This is why institutions study it. This is why the system was built the way it was. Now we must explore the psychological illusion that has affected many holders, the illusion that low supply equals value. This illusion comes from traditional scarcity economics, not digital settlement economics. Scarcity creates value only when scarcity is useful. In a settlement system, scarcity is not useful. It is dangerous. It reduces flexibility. It reduces liquidity. It reduces accessibility. A settlement asset must remain available to meet the needs of a system that spans every region on Earth. This is why XRP's supply model is the opposite of what retail expects. Retail wants scarcity. Global systems want availability. Retail wants rapid price movement. Global systems want stability. Retail wants extreme fluctuations. Global systems want consistent liquidity. This is the disconnect that generates confusion. The 11th truth is that global financial architecture must be scalable. XRP's supply allows scaling without breaking corridors. It allows growth without liquidity failures. It allows adoption without imbalance. The 12th truth is that many holders underestimate the size of the global settlement problem. We are not talking about billions. We are talking about trillions. Every day, trillions of dollars move across borders, and the systems that support this movement are collapsing under pressure. The 13th truth is something most people overlook: the difference between supply and velocity. A settlement asset gains value through movement velocity is as important as quantity. XRP is designed for high velocity, meaning its true value is not in being held, but in being used. 3 final truths bring everything together. The first final truth is that supply confusion distracts people from the real purpose of the asset. When you misunderstand supply, you misunderstand functionality. And when you misunderstand functionality, you misunderstand the entire system. The second final truth is that institutions do not adopt assets based on speculation. They adopt assets based on reliability, predictability, liquidity, and interoperability. These are the exact qualities XRP's supply model supports. And the final truth is the most important one of all. The real warning is not about XRP's supply. The real warning is about ignoring the transformation happening around it. The world is moving toward instant settlement. The world is moving toward global interoperability. The world is moving toward tokenized value. The world is moving toward digital liquidity systems. And XRP's supply exists because the system it supports is built for this world. The warning was never what they are not telling holders. The warning is what holders have not yet taken the time to understand, because once you understand the architecture, the supply model becomes not a concern, but a revelation of design, a revelation of purpose, a revelation of the future. And this system requires enough units to function across the world without creating liquidity shortages. Now let us explore the final concept of this first half, the idea of narrative gaps. Narrative gaps occur when holders only understand part of a system and fill the rest with speculation. But speculation cannot replace architecture, and architecture cannot be understood through emotional narratives. The real story behind XRP supply is not what they are not telling you. It is what people never take time to understand. Because when you understand the intention behind the design, the entire system reveals itself. The second half of this script will go even deeper into the psychology of liquidity distribution, institutional needs, global settlement requirements, and why the supply model of XRP is not a warning of danger, but a warning against misunderstanding the digital future unfolding around us.